Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to the third installment of Crealytics' Inside the Black Box webinar series. This one's called Marketing Transformation, from Retail Legacy to Retail Leadership. I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Emily Culp. Emily is the CEO at CoverFX Skincare, an intellectual powerhouse with a glorious career. She has been recognized by Forbes, world's most influential CMOs, and Business Insider, 50 most innovative CMOs. She has a track record of effecting digital transformation at several consumer brands, including Keds, Estee Lauder, and Rebecca Minkoff. Emily joins us to explore performance advertising's biggest barriers to growth and how to overcome them. Alongside her today is Andreas Reiffen. Andreas is the CEO and strategic leader at Crealytics, a multinational performance advertising agency and a technology firm. He is a sought-after speaker and published expert on the intersection of paid advertising and measurement, particularly on the adaptation of predictive CLV into multi-channel acquisition marketing. I am looking forward to hearing them converse today, and I know they're both very excited to get this started. So Andreas, take it away.
Thanks for the introduction, Sumita, and welcome, Emily. Excited to have this conversation today with you. Let's get right into the topic. If we take a look at the market, e-commerce, retail, last 15 years, there were always a few companies which were ahead of the curve. Online pure players, usually it was Amazon in the early days, then Zappos performed incredibly well in the United States. We had Zalando in Germany driving amazing growth. From your perspective, from a very high level point of view, what were the characteristics of these companies?
Yeah, and also thank you for having me. Very much appreciated and excited to do this. I guess in terms of a high level, if 2 or 3 things really resonate with me. One is all of those companies embraced betas with different partners, whether it was Google or what have you. They embraced beta opportunities to learn quickly about their consumers, about their paid marketing, advertising, et cetera, which I think was extremely smart. A second thing that all the companies did was they invested in the people, meaning the teams that they would bring in internally who could harness this data or this information that they were learning from different partners and actually act on the data to improve their business and scale and grow. And then finally, I would say a common characteristic of all the companies you just mentioned, because they are quite different in many ways, but is speed. I think if you ask anyone who worked within any of those companies, they had almost like a software mentality, even if some of them traded in physical goods, which is it's better to have 80% and to iterate and learn and keep testing. And they applied that not only in the products they created, but also when working with paid advertisers or what have you.
When we take a closer look at the performance advertising side, my perception is that there were kind of different phases. The very early days, you needed a different set of skills to perform than you probably need today. What is it from your perspective that these companies got right in the very early days? Let's say 2005 to 2010, 15, how did these companies differentiate on the advertising side?
I guess to me, I think about it again in multiple different ways, meaning different categories or areas within their business. One is, I think early on, all of them, whether it was called omni-channel customer journey or not, I don't think the phrase was coined yet, but they all started to understand, even Amazon, this is later now, that has stores, but most of the other companies you mentioned did end up having, whether it was pop-up shops or stores, they understood they needed to figure out how the consumer traversed across different touch points with the company in sort of the funnel, if you will. And as a result, I would say all of the companies built their own customized attribution models, meaning they quickly realized just doing last click analysis or just doing ROAS wasn't going to help them scale the business the way they wanted to. So they built their own customized model. And then finally, something, especially with Zalando and ASOS, that blew me away that they figured out is take the data that you're getting from your consumers, whether it's online or in store, and actually impact then your supply chain. So actually create new products or totally different new products or iterate on products that might exist. And where this gets back to performance advertising is we've all had what I call a good, bad problem, which is maybe you're having a really phenomenal sell-through on one of your products. All of your emails, your display, social media assets, there was some social then, all have this one image. Let's say it's a shirt. Well, if you sell out of it, you need to quickly get that data into the system, change all that creative, and real time make iterations so you can continue to grow your business. And I would say all excelled at that. What do you think?
I mean, my impression is, and we've worked in the very early days. We have an affiliate background actually. So in the very early days, we played that game. So basically, we had many large affiliate clients, and the way it worked is we had to acquire traffic directly from Google and monetize it through commission. So it was very early days, my own pocket money I invested. And in the beginning, if I compare what we are doing today, I feel it was a pure efficiency play. It's like, how could you capture all the traffic? How could you build better tools to manage the workflow? How could you be better at bidding? So there was just Google around, not many other channels. So complexity was way lower. Traffic was cheap to get. So it was just, how can you efficiently get it all in? I mean, things then, and I'm curious about your perspective, kind of changed over time.
Yes.
In 2014, that Google introduced shopping, right? I think it started around 2014, 15.
Right.
And if I see what the shopping system itself can do today, it's taking on all the heavy lifting. Like AI has made many people, the worker bees, obsolete, and like efficiency comes as a commodity today. You just get it, no matter who, whether you are experienced, savvy in what you do, you can really use that system and scale. However, it's not that easy to make profits out of this because it's expensive and everyone is now playing this game. So it's sort of, if we take a look at the evolution, and it's the same now with TikTok and Snap, it's kind of an arbitrage game initially.
Yes.
Costs are very low, so you just have to efficiently capture everything which is out there. And now the question, what do you actually still want? So where do you put your dollars? That's how I perceive it.
I think, to your point, my only concern on the efficiency game that we may touch on this later on, is just because the tools can get you the highest ROAS or whatever your KPI is, it's efficient, if you will, but it actually could be detrimental to your business. So my concern with the tools is that a lot of brands are signing up for multiple different software programs, then they layer in agencies, all of which makes sense. But it's important to look at it holistically versus thinking that AI is capable of running your business without the right guidance, strategic guidance.
It's my impression that, and there are lots of now case studies which are public, that in the early days, as traffic was also cheap, the ROAS thing was still kind of fine because everything was profitable. You had just to throw in and capture. Yeah. Nobody really cared about whether your KPIs mattered. And this is where I realized that the whole market caught up with the leaders. So what differentiated them, running faster, being better in that ROAS game, everyone understood, okay, we have to become efficient.
Optimize, yes.
And that's my next question for you. What do you feel, I mean, now, COVID times, every legacy retail brand understands now okay, it's now time. We have to capitalize on the opportunity. E-commerce is ruling the game. We have seen a development in a matter of 1 year, what we would have otherwise expected in a 10-year time frame. And companies are now going out and trying to desperately close the gap to the digital leaders. From your perspective, are these companies looking for the right medication, or what are they looking for today? And let's maybe answer what you feel they should look at in a subsequent question.
Well, first off, I have to say, I'm personally excited, given that I've been doing e-commerce for, in that space for over 20 years. So I'm thrilled that the gap, I am not happy how it happened through a global pandemic, but I'm thrilled that we're closing the gap, at least with the US. Because by the way, many countries, whether it's APAC or parts of EMEA, already were anywhere from 3 to 7 years ahead of us. So I'm thrilled that we're getting there now. I think the part that does keep me up at night, or that I do contemplate, is I have been part of multiple different companies going through a digital transformation. And I think that's it's important to do it, but I think it's important to have realistic expectations and really understand what that means. So to clarify this, it's not just about saying e-commerce, if we've been a legacy wholesale business, now we're going to shift our business overnight to e-commerce. What we'll do is just increase our marketing spend, whether it's performance marketing, whatever. I'm just going to put money in there and it will magically happen.
Throw money at the problem, basically.
That's correct. Buy your way out of something. That is one approach. I would caution against that because it doesn't set up the organization. And most importantly, it doesn't set your consumer up for a great experience. What I mean by that is this takes time to build out, and discipline, and a champion, most likely at the board level and definitely within the C-suite, to really make sure that the whole company changes. What I mean by that, it's everything from org design, possibly where there used to be silos, between operation, finance, product, marketing. Those need to be broken down. And one of the most important things is to start sharing data freely between these different groups, because it may seem tactical and granular to say, oh, why does the finance team need to know how email is doing? It's not that they need to know every email, but they need to understand that should most likely be in the top 3 drivers of your e-commerce business. So if your finance team is looped in on this and your product team, all of a sudden everyone's like, wow, our evergreen CRM trigger emails are pushing unprofitable products. We shouldn't do that. Maybe we should have a discussion around this and start looking at this holistically. So I think there's org design, data sharing, and then, as I said, just going back to, I have to hit it again, the reallocation of resources. Yes, you do need the budget part. That is definitely a question, whatever that amount is correct for the company, but you also need to shift headcount. So again, it's not just about having one island. I call it the island of hope with the e-commerce manager, maybe 1 or 2 other people. There need to be people on that team who truly are like data scientists, who can take the Google Analytics, who can take wherever you're getting all your data from all your different partners, Facebook, whomever, actually glean all the dashboards, come up with different insights, act and iterate, which leads me to the last point, that an e-commerce transformation, the part that also gets massively underestimated is the need for content. All of these channels, whether it's social or a website, are voracious consumers of content. And especially if you want to do A/B testing, let's say in performance marketing, you need content options. So companies need to really build that in-house or outsource it. And then the final piece I would say around this is really having a moment of reckoning around what are the important KPIs or KPI for the business. And if there are agencies involved, which most likely there are, they're going to have a point of view, but you need to have a very strong internal compass as a company on what is your singular KPI optimally, or a very small subset, 2, 3, and make sure that every person at every level in your company understands why and what it is.
Let's maybe start with the point you just mentioned, what are the right KPIs and what are companies looking for today? If we take a very high level perspective,
Sure.
In the very early days, and I still remember this, it was 2009, 2010 e-commerce hype, some fast growing companies, they were all valued based on revenue growth in the end.
It was amazing. Yes, not profitability, just sheer revenue.
You threw a lot of money at marketing, you grew your revenue, and this is how you could drive your valuation. Today, this is just no longer working. And many of us, as we are attending here, have heard of people like Peter Fader, who's propagating a different approach. It's like, analyze cohorts, take a look at the value of customers and come from a bottom-up approach and analyze how sustainable is this? Is this accretive? Do we acquire customers which will yield profits over time? And this is how companies are being valued through, let's say, growth of their customer base, but also through the ability to retain these customers. And then I compare this to reality, where we are being invited to RFPs, and what we usually see is, look, we have a budget, we get a certain revenue out of this budget and a certain ROAS. Can we have a little bit more revenue, a slightly better ROAS? And then I'm wondering, okay, but this is like 2010. It's not about driving revenue, it's about bringing the right customers in. So my question is, is this ask for a better media agency the right approach, or is it rather, let's fundamentally question what we are doing here?
So I think there's a lot of gray, to be honest. I don't think it's totally binary, black or white. What I do think is important, this goes back to some of the points we've discussed, is if you don't have a clear picture on your business, you can bring in any agency you want. They're not going to solve it for you. That's not actually, I think, a reasonable request to ask your agency. And what I mean by this is if your business, let's say right now, whether still is focused on ROAS, which I have strong feelings, or CAC, customer acquisition cost, the challenge with that, with ROAS, the game is how do I get higher ROAS? And with CAC, usually it's how do I reduce my CAC? The challenge with both of these approaches, both are quite used metrics right now. I look forward to whatever the next iteration in the evolution of e-commerce will be away from these, because if you pursue both of those, what you're actually doing is killing a healthy funnel. You're actually consistently pursuing bottom funnel to get lower CAC costs because these are consumers. It just works that way, and same with ROAS. So eventually that's may work for the short term, but it doesn't work for like LTV. You can't actually run a business that way long term. So why this goes back to the agency is if you brief your agency and say, here are my ROAS targets, inevitably, you're going to end up, if they hit your ROAS targets to get them high, you're going to kill your traffic. And potentially, usually that correlates to revenue. So then the phase next is let's get another agency, same KPIs. You're in a cycle at this point and you can't break it. So I think one of the opportunities is for the hard work to happen really from the ground up, understanding the profitability or profit margin and all your products, really thinking about what does, your shareholders, whether you're public or private, what do they value? Most likely what they value is a long-term growth, healthy growth of a company. And how you can achieve that is more looking at the full funnel. I think this is a great slide if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, let's quickly take your point, Emily. Of course, sure. Prep call, so I put the slide on to back up what you just mentioned. I said before we started as affiliates. So in the very days, we were paid based on a CPO. So whether we sold socks for $10 or a Gucci handbag for $5,000, same CPO, and everything that matters was hidden in that KPI. So it clearly did not make sense. So it didn't take long. And then next thing was you were getting paid based on a percentage of the revenue you drove. So it was a revenue-based model. And the downside you're mentioning here is that, well, what is revenue? You can sell to existing customers, then it's probably not worth that much because they would have come and buy from you anyway.
Right.
And sell high margin products, low margin products, and it's not very telling. And the next step of the evolution was then, okay, let's factor the profit margins in, and we want to push segments where we see higher margins, and instead of just driving revenue, that doesn't really matter. And at the point of time where people like Peter Fader became more popular, it then became clear, okay, how do we measure the long-term impact? We bring people in today and they are gonna spend money tomorrow, next year, and we're gonna retain them. And there's especially one company which is incredibly smart on this. They're called About You. They actually started really late in the German market, grew faster than anybody else. And what they did, they invested heavily into new customer acquisition, ignored just short-term goals. And what happened, they just decreased the ad spend over time. So they drove more and more growth over time, while the ad spend was brought down to a much lower level. And why? Because they benefited from all these repeat purchases, kind of trying to acquire the best customers possible and capitalize on their repeat purchases.
I think, by the way, I think that's a much better way to explain it than I did, because I think when I was talking about CAC, it's not that it's the bottom of the funnel. I guess, just as you described it, it's more about the fact that maybe the least expensive CAC, let's say it's $20, I'm mythically making this up, long-term, your lifetime value around that consumer, you may have a low CAC, but your lifetime value is not going to be great, versus modeling out if you had a higher CAC, let's say $100, but lifetime value is much higher. That's a better choice. So this goes back to, it's not as binary, like get your CAC to 20, when in fact, actually $100 CAC may be the best thing for your business if you model it out and have the data. Oh, good. You're going to illustrate this.
We have this example here. So let's just assume we have two audiences we can target. It's fashion geeks and bargain hunters, just for the sake of
Sure.
bringing up an example here, real numbers. And let's simply assume we have a budget of $100 we can spend. And the goal is to get the lowest possible customer acquisition costs. So with these two audiences, let's say the fashion geeks, they are worth on the long run, including their repeat purchases, $500. Why? Because they buy fresh, in-season, full-price products, and they will come back all the time. While someone who shops on a Black Friday might buy once and never come back, and even buy something very cheap. So the bargain hunters have a CLV of 20. While the fashion geeks, they are way more expensive to acquire because everyone is going after them. The bargain hunters you can get them at a cheaper price. So if you want to get the lowest possible CAC, what you do is you acquire two bargain hunters. And you actually, in this example, you make a loss of 30 for each, means $60 loss by maximizing CAC. If that's the target and you blindly follow that target, what usually happens if there's a given target and people are incentivized to hit that target, this is what they're gonna do. So let's see what would happen if we changed that target. So if we would now be tasked to maximize the customer lifetime value with a budget of 100, we would just acquire one fashion geek, would make a profit of 400. So the point here, and that's what you mentioned, Emily, is that the target itself kind of defines how well you perform in advertising. And if you work on a CAC target, it's game over. There's no way this can yield the best possible results. And I think where the mistake, and I'm happy to for you to chime in my opinion, where the mistake happens is that on the finance side, where the targets are usually being set, there is limited understanding that new customer acquisition is not a byproduct of some campaign which is running. It's something you can choose today who you want to acquire. And if you want to acquire the best folks, you have to pay a higher price. And the average CAC is just destroying this granular way of acquiring traffic.
I think that's completely right. And this is a great illustration. Thank you for doing this on just explaining how with the best intentions, and most people thinking, putting on a finance lens, I have $100, I want to optimize. It's very easy to understand how you go for the bargain hunter. But that's where going back to having the right types of team members who are the data scientists who can feed this information back, who can explain it, because part of it, it's a different part of the financial acumen. This is not intuitive. It's not like reading a balance sheet. Not everybody has the depth of training in this. So it's important that this be explained and the nuances, so then you actually build a profitable business that actually can keep growing. Because going back to my point, let's just say you keep doing your bargain hunter, the takeaway potentially might be whether it's the agency isn't working or the creative isn't working or something else, but you're continuing to put money into that and you're continuing to deepen your loss. And that is not a great way for any business to operate. So I think part of it does come back to just fluency in this language as well.
Maybe we can also take a look at the other KPI, which from my experience is even way more prominent today in the market. That's the standard KPI, which is ROAS.
Yeah.
Let's play the same game here. Like we have two products. On the left-hand side, a printer cartridge costs $20. CLV is 100. Why? Because someone who's buying a printer cartridge will need a next printer cartridge. If you buy that fire extinguisher, it's very unlikely that you will buy many of them. So the CLV will be much lower on this product, which you can see if you analyze your data. And let's then assume that the printer cartridge has a cost of sales ratio of 50%, or let's take the inverse, a ROAS of 2, and the fire extinguisher has a ROAS of 4. So for both products, we need $10 Google spend in order to convert the user to buy that product. So let's assume now, same thing. Our goal is to maximize the ROAS out of $100 budget. What would we do here? We would sell 10 fire extinguishers. CLV is 45. We have to spend 10 to sell it, makes a profit of 35 times 10 is, we generate an overall profit of 350. Then let's assume we would aim for maximizing CLV. What would we do? We would sell 10 times the printer cartridge. Cost to acquire the customer was 10, makes a profit of 90 over time per sale. 10 sales means overall it's a 900 profit we would generate here. And again, we see that the target itself is just makes a world of a difference in terms of what you get. And I'd like to play this back to you. We see this is these two KPIs are being widely used today. Why is this, Emily, or what can companies do to pivot away? What needs to be done in order to, I mean, seems to be a simple thing, but yet it's something which is stuck in the market. And the innovators, they have a long time ago moved away from these KPIs, but still old school companies struggle a lot in just getting rid of this kind of nonsense KPI.
I guess a few nuances. One is I wouldn't just say it's old school companies. I think there are a lot of D2C companies that still use these as well, because they're generally accepted metrics that people feel that they're comfortable with. ROAS is one that consistently, at least ROAS and CAC are ones that whether it's public boards, private boards, everyone is heard, knows roughly which direction they should go in. It goes back to the fluency of the details behind it. And honestly, these straightforward, simple examples show why it's so important to think about it beyond just get a higher ROAS, get a lower CAC. But I think part of that needs to happen, going back to my education piece. The second piece is many agencies still are, have agency models built around this, that they will get efficiencies or more fees if they get higher ROAS. So it's not only you have governance within a company that believes these might be the right metrics, but you also have agencies saying, look, I got your ROAS to 8 versus 2. I think it's a systemic issue. I think there's also a challenge, if I'm being truthful, on the brand side. Usually brands are more reluctant to do really sensitive analysis on some of these examples that you've discussed. You also need to know the profit margin around the product. And not every brand or company is open to sharing that information with agencies. And this goes back to what kind of partnership are you looking to set up? Because truly, if you're going to look at, again, I believe in growing businesses for the long term. If that's your goal, then you would want to share with your partners financial information, of course, with everyone signing NDAs, but then modeling out these exercises and making sure that there's alignment on what is the right KPI, because I would argue it's not either one of these.
Maybe there also needs to be a stronger business case, and I
would love that. I wish this was taught in business school, because these KPIs, I can tell you from just teaching a class 2 weeks ago, these are KPIs. CAC, the other one that's taught in business school is Net Promoter Score, which to me is a whole nother one on why that's still a focal point. Doesn't mean that any of these metrics are bad. It's just truly understanding what all the numbers mean. And I think that's where it starts to get a bit dangerous, when people myopically focus on one.
Let's maybe take a little more practical perspective. So because
of course,
made up examples here. So the question also for the attendees here is, what happens if you actually do this in practice? And I'd like to show a few numbers here. If we can switch to the respective slide. What happens if we actually put in different signals into the bidding? So instead of setting a ROAS target and aiming for ROAS, we can also aim for example, CLV, what we showed in these 2 previous examples. And let me first explain what we did here. So it was a test where we had a revenue optimization, ROAS-based optimization, in this case with a third-party bidding tool. And what this tool did is it was chasing down the revenue as much as it could. Means go very low funnel, do a lot of retargeting, sell also low margin products if necessary. So just everything which maximizes revenue. And the comparison, and that's the orange chart, is where we did data activation. So basically we put profit data and CLV predictions back into the Google bidding, and then we tested what happens. And there is the spend on the data activation TROAS part was 20% lower, but yet the net sales was roughly the same. Where did this come from? This is just superior bidding system. TROAS is without any competition in the market, so it just performs better. But then you can see margin was 9% higher, but where the real magic happened is that there was 60% more new customers brought in. And this is simply aiming for a different target. As we were showing before in these examples, this is just massive if new customer acquisition can be increased by 60%. And I'm showing this because it's probably much easier to make a business case for changing a KPI set, which might be used across different departments, across the whole company, because it's something which really matters. And if you now think about what happens in the future, you will benefit from these repeat purchases of the new customers. So the ratio of what you spend on the marketing side will naturally go down over time compared to just hitting the same existing customers again, low incremental impact and not bringing new folks in, which will stick to the business. From your point of view, Emily, there are data questions and organizational issues. What is harder to solve?
I would say organizational. I really would, just because that, you think about it, again, depending on the life cycle or life stage, I should say more so of a company where it is, you know, this is a whole shift in mindset. And this is a new type of team, most likely or a skill set that's brought into a company. And that takes a bit longer to usually really, not as a beta within a company as like this little pioneering offshoot group that does this. That usually does happen. And I've been part of those in large companies. It's great. It's successful as the pilot program, but it's really hard to then scale that, especially multi-billion-dollar companies. So I would say focus on the organization. I also think it's key to have, I go back to it, I really think a lot of this, and I don't mean this in a patronizing way, but I think a lot of this is around comprehension and education, similarly to how a finance person looks at the 3 statements, explaining that maybe to a product innovation or design specialist, and they would do the same on materials and composition. We all have our different expertise, but it's making sure that everyone's speaking the same language, and I think this is critical. So it's org and education. Data can be resolved. Technology is actually the easier part of this, but that's my opinion.
I would agree. It's, first of all, it's not easy to pull in all the first-party data. You have to into the back end and pull it from different sources. You need to have the capability to do CLV predictions. It's not that easy. As you have little data in, you have a single conversion, and at that point you need to predict what do we expect from this new customer. You have to all put it back into the system, so it's not easy. But in our experience, it always works without any exception, but it has to be a priority, and the problem is to make it a priority. So how do you really make the business case, and how do you get 10 different stakeholders, which might not be advertising nerds, to actually buy into this? How do you make sure that the budgeting process on the financing side is being changed? Because it's no longer about ROAS, doesn't matter anymore. It's becomes some sort of irrelevant KPI, but something which has been relevant over 10 years is hard to remove immediately.
I would agree with you, and that's almost in an interesting way where it's getting the opportunities to speak with the head of DTC. Let's say it's in a wholesale D2C mixed environment, maybe a legacy company. It's sitting down with the head of e-commerce and also trying to get the CFO for that division or their counterpart in finance. I think that's critical, because that's when you start to shift the conversation.
Yeah. Let's talk about a last topic, which in my opinion is as important as this one here with the KPIs. So there were 4 different stories which are public now. This was one about eBay, another one about Adidas, Topshop, and the latest one, Airbnb. And it's remarkable. It was basically, it's the same story 4 times. And to summarize it, wrap it up, It's 4 companies which were known for excellent advertising. They had data scientists and practitioners, tools and everything. And at some point, either intentionally or accidentally, they had cut off their ad spend and found out that nothing happens. So they were getting the same traffic they got before. So they realized that people might click on ads and buy, but they not necessarily bought because they clicked. They wanted to buy and happened to click. And so these companies all learned a very, very hard lesson here. Have you, what's your take on this? So how should we measure success today? So what number spaces should we take? Should we take the numbers for granted as they are being played back from the publishers?
I believe you need to look at data from multiple different sources. When you think about it, Facebook, I'm not saying anything negative on Facebook, Google, or anyone else, but everybody, each one of those platforms has their own perspective on, they're all trying to get to the same dollars if you're a brand with advertising spend. So they all are incentivized to ensure that you see the data that they would like you to see it in their perspective. So I think it's very important to, like, for example, look at a campaign across multiple different platforms with your own data and really look at it holistically versus taking one platform's data as the ever truth. There's that piece. I think the other aspect of all of this is, you know, it goes back to building that custom KPI that's right for your business, that's really looking at the right metrics for your business and growing your business in a profitable way. But I think it'd be great if you could jump into this and show this a bit more in visual.
You mean the incrementality testing?
Yeah. I think the incrementality is key. I mean,
let's keep this very high level and not.
Sure, of course.
Details, but I mean, we have to be aware of what we are seeing, right? So we
100%.
Someone clicked on an ad and we see a conversion, and a long time we apparently even the smart companies had taken these numbers for granted, and they based their investment decisions on them until they went dark and realized, oh, nothing is happening. So let's take a good example for this. Imagine you have vouchers in your hand and you go to whatever, it's a Banana Republic store on Broadway. Promote, and you give these vouchers to people at Battery Park in New York. You will see very, very few people buying then the product in the Banana Republic store. And then you have another guy who takes these same vouchers and puts himself right at the register and hands these vouchers to people who are just about to buy. In this case, this will look like a huge success, but the vouchers did not drive these sales. And that's essentially what's happening with ads. And this, from what we see, huge hype where attribution is completely being replaced, where numbers as we see them with current attribution methodologies, whatever happened post a click, are replaced by numbers we get from dedicated tests. So essentially, and maybe we can go one slide further, what we do is we have two groups, two cohorts of people. We can do this in a geo way, for example, and we expose one group with ad, this group B, and group A is not being exposed to ads. These geolocations are selected based upon correlation, so they must be very correlating, and then you see what happens once you go dark. How much do you lose? And very simple, if nothing happens, your ads didn't matter, and if you start losing revenue, you know exactly what the impact was. And this is like a test design which is a bit tedious and it's a bit costly because you have to go dark and stop spending. A next organizational problem eventually, how do you justify that you don't get your ROAS figures in anymore? But you will learn that whether or not you got anything back or how much you got back. The message here is clearly not stop advertising, but it's clearly, and if we go to the previous slide again, if we test Facebook remarketing for incrementality, we see that 1% of what we see in the Facebook interface is real, and 99% pops up, but has nothing to do with reality. And in this case, there's no gain in chasing or in basing my investment decisions on the assumption that I get this whole box if all I get is this tiny little box in the corner. And means we should spend there, but maybe we find other channels which are, show higher incrementality, for example, prospecting, because we then target people who are not already in the funnel.
Well, I think that, I guess to me, we've talked about ROAS, CAC, all those metrics. I think the part two that will go in your decade, going back to your summary on shifts in decades, if you will, or periods in e-commerce. I think the other one, in the past few years, everyone shifted so heavily to performance marketing, meaning retargeting everything, because again, you got the great ROAS there. So I almost feel like this is a sweeping generalization. I don't like doing these, but for argument's sake, a lot of companies went 70, 80% of their budget into performance marketing. And that's what you're referencing on like Airbnb and those guys. Everyone was thrilled with the ROAS, but eventually, whether it was COVID for them or others, some companies start to lose brand heat and they start to lose traffic. And they're like, what's going on? I've got great ROAS. I'm kicking all of these numbers super. I'm pouring more money into that because it's super efficient, but you're talking to the same people. So what you've done is you're not growing your brand heat or your brand awareness at a high level. So you're actually killing your funnel. So what I'm excited about is that companies are now starting to rebalance, I would say more so, their funnel spending. And again, whether they're using CAC ROAS, whatever their metric is, it's not going to be what they went in as, but they're actually then growing the business in the right way. It's going to be a healthy business going forward, of course, assuming profit margins are where they should be for the products. But you have to think about the full funnel, and performance marketing is a great aspect of it, but it can't be where you spend the lion's share of your money.
That's precisely the problem. What you're describing, Emily, is that the way we track things today, usually last click, means that everything which is up the funnel looks really bad in your KPIs, and everything which is down the funnel looks great. The problem is where things look really bad, the incremental impact is much higher, and where they look phenomenal, the incremental impact is lower. If you see what the retargeting companies are doing, where they really push hard and bid high, is where people have a high buying propensity, which is my register Banana Republic example. So they wait, see who is supposed to now come back, has shown major activity on the site just very recently, and let's get our ad in front of these people because they have decided to buy already, and this way we drive this artifact KPI. And on the other hand, if we then reallocate budget from this lowest funnel retargeting and we shift it upwards, what will happen is that our numbers won't look as good anymore, as long as we don't report based on incremental impact. And if we did this, the Facebook retargeting, the 100 we report today would go down to a $1. So moving this $1, the spend then to a higher funnel activity will look better in the numbers. Again, hard problem to tackle because there must be, it's a cross-functional thing. Many people have to be on board, and I've seen people losing their jobs when they wanted to propagate something like this, which truly makes sense, of course.
I think the interesting part is it's like many things. When you're trying to solve one aspect, you over-index too much on that, it becomes too myopic. And what's interesting to me is when a brand is swung, let's say the 70, 80% in performance or retargeting so heavily, all the money they think they're saving or driving, et cetera, they will have to triple down in brand awareness and brand heat initiatives 2-3 years later, when they all of a sudden realize traffic and everything else is like grossly off. And the amount of money they will then have to invest becomes shocking to the system or the organization. And by the way, it's not a quick solution at that point.
Emily, I'd love to continue. This is a great conversation. I'm just looking at time, and we have 7 minutes left. I'd like to give our attendees the opportunity to also ask questions. Not sure whether there are any, but whoever wants to ask something, please jump in. We are happy to try to solve or think about your problems or answer your questions. So please go ahead.
Yes, we can't promise the solution for world peace, but we'll do our best on other questions.
Absolutely. I do have a question which digresses from world peace, so we can get on it.
Great.
The question is, how can you teach your marketing team and the financial literacy part so that it needs to make smarter and more informed advertising decisions?
Do you want to jump in, Emily? Should I?
I mean, honestly, one of the ways I love to teach personally, and I love to be taught, so I like both sides of the coin on learning. I think one of the ways, actually, some of the very straightforward, simple examples that were just shared up here a moment ago around ROAS and CAC really help explain it in the most simplistic terms, where that's where I call it the aha moment. I'd really also encourage that if you're doing it with your marketing team, to also include your finance team. Because a lot of times these metrics are, yes, they're coming through marketing to some degree, but if you start shifting and your finance team is thinking, what are you doing? You're not getting the same ROAS, or your CAC has gone down, you're asking for more money, you need to bring everyone on the journey with you. So I'd highly recommend having bare minimum marketing and your finance team sit together and go through those 2 examples.
On the same question, my impression is that it's not a problem on the marketing side in the first place. I would definitely agree with what you said, Emily. In my opinion, mistake is happening on the finance side in the first place. And let me describe what I'm observing. There is a CFO, and the CFO receives the numbers, usually not incrementality tested, maybe last click, but he tends to take these numbers for granted. And they are all, very good at numbers games. What they then do is they have profitability KPIs in mind, new customer acquisition targets they have in mind, and they translate this into a ROAS, and then they set the ROAS target. Where the mistake happens is that they are not aware that the mix of existing versus new customers or high margin versus low margin products isn't a fixed ratio. It's something you can choose what products you want to sell. You can choose which customers you acquire, and it's not just a byproduct. So I think this somehow has to be explained, and then it's a hell lot of education on the finance side to actually make this happen, and this can be triggered by marketing, in my opinion.
I think I would respectfully add, I do think it, depending on where the marketing team is sourced from. A lot of digital marketing people in large companies are sourced from agencies, at which point it's usually more ROAS. So I think it's important for both constituents or capabilities to go on the journey together. I'm excited for another question. Do we have another one?
Perhaps let's do one last question and then we can actually call it a day. So one of the questions is, how accurate are CLV predictions versus black swan events that can leave you with predictive CLV but not realized revenue in the given time frame?
So we actually had another webinar on the accuracy of CLV predictions. So let's first describe how this works, because there are two kinds of CLV predictions. One is I take a look at my CRM. I usually have people who are long-term customers and I want to predict what else can I expect from these guys. This is a use case where you have plenty of data, you know exactly what they purchased over time, and you can build very, very, very solid models. For the advertising use case, it's totally different, because at the point of time when the conversion happens, you have to tell the Google bidding what the value of that conversion was. And what do you have there? Nothing. You have a single sale. However, you know the basket composition, you know the channel someone came through, you know demographics. So you have quite a few initial data points. And technically what you do, you look for similar orders of similar people, same channel, and you kind of have a lookalike way. And then based on these more higher aggregations, you forecast. I'm incredibly surprised how accurate this can be. So you see the models basically predict for example, one element is they predict the likelihood of a second purchase, and where they predict a very high likelihood, like almost 100%, we see that actually most people do come back. Where the models predict almost zero likelihood, almost none of these folks actually comes back. So there is a very, very good way already to know right after the first purchase whether you have this mediocre new customer or very good one. And again, the same thing, it's providing signals. Google needs to know in which segments you drive high value new customers and where you drive just average new customers. And that's works incredibly well today already.
Right. With that, I do thank Andreas and Emily. This was a very insightful and intriguing session. But before we call it a day, I'd like to quickly note that our next session is scheduled for May the 5th at 1 p.m. ET. And we will be talking to Ujjwal Doot, the CMO of DXL Brands. And he'll talk about layering data, ideas, and test approaches for an advantage in e-commerce's new era. So we often wonder, is there a secret sauce for adapting to new customer needs? And if anyone should hazard a guess, it's Ujjwal. So please tune in on the 5th and we'll see you then. And thank you very much, everybody, for joining this webinar.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.